it's finally here. The third developer blog has just been released, giving us some more combat footage, as well as digging into some of the details on things like weapon mastery, PvP, and kind of this real-time combat system. So today I just want to have a very quick dig into this developer diary, take a bit of a look at some of the footage, and kind of just see what we can learn about it before we actually hit open beta next month. Pretty much right from the off, the developers are sort of really hammering home this idea of real-time combat. And kind of from the footage we're getting to see in this developer blog, combined with some of the previous examples of footage we've had from, things like the press articles, I mean, genuinely the combat is actually looking really pretty good, pretty solid. I really like the look of it. Although I think it is worth pointing out that, it is now 2020, and the more kind of traditional MMO style tab targeting, it's getting a bit long in the tooth, and I kind of would expect a modern high-budget MMO like New World to make use of real-time combat. So I'm pleased they have, but I don't think it's worth shouting about that much. But of course, one of the real benefits of the real-time combat, kind of as pointed out in the dev blog, is that it allows room for an element of combat skill and tactics, rather than just sort of character level and character equipment. The ability to dodge arrows, jump back from sword swings, make use of terrain, should ultimately allow for an element of skill combat, and should hopefully allow for things like a level 50 to be able to outplay and kill a level 60 player. The blog then rapidly moves on to talking about weapon mastery. This in effect seems to be their kind of replacement for a class system. The more you make use of a specific weapon type, the more weapon mastery points you'll earn in that specific weapon. And then apparently each weapon type should have at least 2 distinct branches of weapon mastery points that will then allow for some very different playstyles. So they give a couple of examples, one of which was, if you think of a one-handed axe, you could go down the throwing axe route. We've seen throwing axes quite a lot in some of the combat footage both on this dev blog and in previous press releases. Or you could focus more just on that melee damage, making it a really hard-hitting, close-range offensive weapon. Or you could take something like a sword and shield. You could really focus on maximum damage output with that sword, going all out offense. Or you could look at the other one of the weapon mastery trees, which focuses much more on the defensive stats, making use of the shield, making you kind of the ultimate tank. And I think that once you start to combine this with the fact that we know you're going to be able to have, multiple weapons on sort of quick select tabs, where you can just switch from your sword and shield and pull out your bow from your back, and then when each of them has got a couple of different possible routes you can go down within those weapons, the combinations or the number of combat different options and styles and combinations that are going to be available really starts to get quite large. And I think this is where their classless system is really starting to come into play and actually starting to seem like it's going to work quite nicely, because I don't think there's going to be one sort of fixed meta style. I think it's hopefully going to be multiple. Furthermore, the dev team was really quite keen and quite quick to point out that there is no limit to the number of weapons you can learn or mastery points you can unlock. So I think the point is that ultimately you really could learn every weapon in the game. So there's no penalty or no consequence if you, start off and put a lot of effort into learning the bow, but then you decide, actually I wish I was a musket player all along. You're not class locked into that bow. You can start learning the musket, and you can learn all the way up to the max, same as everyone else. There's no consequences. You're not limited or contained, by a class system. The blog also briefly touches upon magic, as well as this showing this absolutely awesome combat clip of it. I certainly want to bring some fire-based destruction to people, particularly with that sound effect. It sounds absolutely awesome. But one area where they did mention where I had some concerns was they mentioned the use of intelligence points to determine the power of your magic. Well, considering they're supposed to be going for this sort of classless based system, and kind of assuming that if they're going to be having intelligence points, we can assume there's probably going to be dexterity and strength and agility and kind of all the usual ones that go in this sort of classic game, then that kind of pretty well locks you into the weapon class that you're going to put those points into, or at least it makes it a little harder to sort of end up maining something different, unless it's really easy to move those points around. So for example, if you, as it suggests, put all your points in intelligence and start off using a staff, and then decide that you want to move on to a sword, then you're going to be pretty off meta if all your points are stuck into intelligence. So how easily you're going to be able to move those points from intelligence to strength or whatever the attribute point for melee damage is going to be, that's going to be pretty important in determining how flexible this classless system actually is. The blog then sort of moves on to talk about the ever-dreaded topic of PvP, always the controversial one. It kind of reconfirms their commitment to the PvP flagging system, but it does show us some pretty interesting small-scale sort of one-on-one combat fights, which we haven't seen before, as well as some of the older footage from the larger 50v50 sort of huge siege battles that we sort of got a little bit of detail from in some of the press articles a few weeks ago. From kind of my initial watch through though, the footage for the first sort of couple of times, I've personally found myself really much more drawn to the one-on-one fights. They look really quite intense, quite tactical, quite exciting to me, whereas I think I kind of find the larger 50v50 fights just a little bit chaotic. I don't know if that's necessarily a fair way of saying it, but maybe a lot of people that find that comes down to personal preference. A lot of people are probably pretty hyped about the idea of a sort of a huge 50v50 chaotic siege battle. Just for me, those smaller scale skirmishes, 1, 2, 3 or 4 people, little group fights, that's where I really get excited about. So I'm really hoping that they continue to develop the factional warfare system, where they're really trying to encourage players to actively flag on the PvP, so we can get stuck into some of these sort of just fights in the open world where factional groups are kind of bumping into each other and getting engaged in these sort of small skirmish battles. And that is really all I've about got for you. They really like to keep their developer blog short, and it was only sort of about 5 minutes, but it was great to get some new footage on the game, particularly combat footage. I think that's something that so many people wanted to see more about, to kind of get a feel of what the game was going to be like. I know I, for one, genuinely am much more positive after having seen this. I think the game really is looking really quite solid. I just really can't wait to play when we get to the closed beta, the open beta even in April. Really going to be quite an exciting time. Certainly can't wait to get stuck in and be able to try this game out. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Do let me know what you think about the devblog in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel for a load more new world content, and I shall see you guys all on the next video.